Hey, that was fun. I'm always appreciative of a good pre-made template that makes my life easier.
Oh, for sure.
Thank you, StreamYard, and I think it's still getting going here. StreamYard for recording this and then also making it easier when it becomes YouTube later on. But I know we're a few minutes behind, and we'll see a few more folks. I'm gonna just bug the alert that came in. There we go. And there we go. Okay, I'm getting a different number on Twitch than I am on here, which is fine. That is a-okay. So first off, thanks for joining me in this fun little hour of all of this. And so basically the idea is just interviewing it. It's going to become a YouTube video later on. So, but rather than recording a YouTube video separately, why don't we just post it live to Twitter? Because #build in public, but not in a gross, not in a gross like thought leadership way. Cause I'm not into that shit. That's not fun. But yeah, I am really fortunate to kind of watch you build Sprezza and build it in public and build everything that's kind of coming forth out of Sprezza. But I'd be curious, like, if you take a moment and talk about who are you? What do you do? What is your, I'm like, who are you? What do you do? You went through a hat change in those 30 seconds. But also what's next to come?
Yeah, we had a last minute wardrobe change. But
last minute wardrobe change. And what's to come out of all this. And if you're tuning in, I see we've got 4 or 5 people tuning in right now. You can feel free to drop if you've heard of Sprezza before or your favorite piece of menswear. That would be super dope. So yeah.
Yep. Hey, well, thank you for having me, Aaron. And I mean, you and I are homies at this point and feel that we have a lot of strong synergy just around the idea of creation kind of anything. And that's one of the things that I respect about your work and the stuff that you have been building. And one of my favorite things about Aaron is that like she's just down to tinker, experiment, try shit, and put it out in the universe and like see what happens. And I think that has been like a low-key inspiration for me kind of on my journey and in my career of just like not taking creative projects and creative things so seriously, but being willing to like put stuff out and just see what happens. And also realizing that like not everything has to be like as serious as, quote unquote, like building and scaling like some kind of business, right? I think culturally we're really accustomed to that, especially in the West, where like the thing that you start has to like take over your identity. And I think one thing that I learned in building Sprezza and still maybe Sprezza grows into my full-time thing eventually, or it becomes like the livelihood that I build a business on or whatever, or maybe it doesn't. But I think like just the mental shift of being okay with kind of either outcome has been really cool. So I just wanted to say that like out of the gates, but
yeah, well, thank you. Cause that's,
you're welcome.
Yeah, I was going to say that's actually been a huge hesitancy of leading into the creator space myself, is I never wanted something to take over my life. And I like to be able to dabble and tinker. And that was the original idea behind a lot of this, is because I didn't want to hone in and focus in on one thing or another. It was always this idea of like, if I put myself in a creation, what if I wake up in the morning and I don't want to create anymore? And being able to have that like reality, like you can say, oh my goodness, I'm having a bad day, rather than I need to get content out and I'm going to kill myself if we're getting this content out. And it's like, it's being human.
Well, and that kind of opens up a conversation around like the greater debate between like building something that you've raised money for versus building something organically because it started as like a hobby. And, I started Sprezza really in like the summer, fall of 2020. So like still early pandemic stuff. And I was between jobs, trying to decide if I wanted to go freelance or go somewhere else full time. And I started Sprezza just as a creative outlet because I was tired of and like burnt out of like giving so much energy to like full-time stuff and wanted to work on something that felt like it was fun. And for me, like I like clothing. I've kind of always liked clothing, and I also feel that people have always come to me because I can curate things for them, whether it's experiences or products or my ability to kind of see trends or, have vision for like how movements kind of happen, in the culture, especially stylistically. And so like, I wanted to create a space where I could talk about that stuff. And so that was what Sprezza, I think, has become. But yeah, Sprezza is just a newsletter that I send out weekly. And it is a newsletter exploring men's clothing, right? So I talk about some retail stuff. I talk about brands that I like. I talk about products and review them. I introduce my readers to designers or people making shit in the space. And I put together like curated guides. And so my idea is that I don't want to create another space that's like crowded and noisy and filled with ads and like all of that kind of stuff. Although I do obviously take sponsored posts, on my content, but I want it to be a space where people can come and be inspired, come to get like well curated information, and then a place where people can be educated on stuff. So I would say that, for Sprezza, like it's a mix of like discovery. So like finding new brands and products. It's a mix of curation. Like here's a good roundup of things that I think, are worth you investing your money in. And then it's a mix of like education. So like, here's the history of how, military clothing has basically become like culturally ingrained in every like menswear genre, or here's the history of how Carhartt became a streetwear brand, and taking some of those different topics that are like bigger topics, and like, it's how people kind of see the observations in the culture. It's like, oh, why do people wear this stuff? And it's like helping the reader like dissect it and be like, oh, well, this is where this came from.
Well, I think that's like in your journey, like that's the thing that I've admired most about doing it. I remember when we first started working together, you had to explain what sneakers were in sneaker culture to me, because I was like, this is I don't get, please explain, please help, because I'm lost.
Yeah.
And that's what I really enjoyed. But men's fashion and fashion as a whole is a very subjective industry. Like, sorry, I'm gonna like love the history post, but I can't get behind the bucket hats. I know you declared that in the article that it was a trend, and I'm like, bucket hats I can't get into, as well as the gorp core. I'm like, ooh, why is that a thing? I grew up in rural America. This was like a farm store thing, and now it's high fashion. Please explain. But how do you define like what is fashionable as a creator, especially when in a very subjective industry?
Yeah, I mean, it is completely subjective, and I think that has been kind of part of my journey in helping people discover what good style is for themselves, what good style is for me. I mean, I think the newsletter is for me as much as it is for anybody else, because I don't have the answers, and I'm not the authority on stuff. I have opinions, and I think I have some good opinions, and I'm sure there's plenty of opinions that people think are just like trash or BS, and like that's fine too. I don't really care, but that's kind of the point, is that like, culturally we're kind of stepping into this new phase of like clothing being subjective, which I was listening to a podcast about that the other day, where it's like someone was sort of like posing the thought of like, it's hard to tell people like how to dress anymore, or it's hard to have conversations about clothing and like what you should wear, or like what good style is, because like having good style was always something that was like associated with like high society, or like being rich or aristocratic, and now like clothing is so much more leveled in terms of like what you wear, because it's a sense of like self-expression. And so it's hard to be able to like know for someone like, hey, like here are good tips on like how to dress well, because so much of that information has become subjective. And again, that's not a bad thing either, necessarily. It's just kind of like where we are culturally. And I think me trying to create a space with the content itself has helped other people find their style as a result of that, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of what I do. In general, I would say like I'm a creator at large. I have kind of leaned more into that recently. I love content. I love writing content. I love making content. I love talking about stuff on the internet. And I think just love being able to help connect like cultural dots for people across like clothing and fashion and music and art and entertainment. So a lot of the stuff that I post about relates to like brands, consumer world, brand marketing, how brands reach customers, how you communicate, what your positioning and messaging is. And that's kind of where I found like, I think a fun niche for myself. And so, that's currently my setup.
Yeah, which is kind of interesting, because I know this creator world has always been here and part of your brain for some extent, for some time. So it's been, very first, I think you were working in the fashion industry in a very different form, which kind of gives you this expertise in industry that not many other people, I think, in the fashion industry have to some extent.
Right.
So if you want to elaborate on that, of kind of what got you in fashion in the first place.
Yeah, I went to school first of all, I grew up in a really small town, and like really small town. And so I think for me, like the idea of like cultural, having access to like style or fashion or like trends, or like knowing what was hot like was not really a thing for me, just because I didn't have access to that stuff, and we were still sort of like early internet, when I was growing up. And so, access to stuff that was happening kind of around the world wasn't really accessible for me. And so I went to school in New York City for college, and that was like the first time when I was able to just like see the world from a completely different perspective. Like going from a small town to like the greatest city on the planet was like a culture shock for me. And so, but it was the first place where I was just enamored with the way people express themselves, the way people dress, the way that folks interact with each other in a city like New York, and how it's driven by so much like of success and greed and money and like all that stuff, but like how clothing was so central to that. And so, and like growing up, I'd always liked clothing. My mom, she dressed us for church every Sunday. She was really good, like alterations woman and seamstress. And so she taught us how to tailor clothing. She taught us how to like alter our own stuff growing up. And so we would go to Goodwill and pick up old shit from the bins and, go tailor it to our bodies. And that was kind of like my experience and upbringing with clothing growing up. And then when I was in the city, I was like fortunate to get a few opportunities to work in the fashion space. And so, my first experiences were working at Michael Kors and then on to Barney's New York, and got to see things from an editorial and styling perspective, and got to see things from like a buying and merchandising and planning perspective as well. And so it kind of just gave me this broad perspective of like what fashion is from a luxury standpoint. And that kind of laid the foundation for me around clothing. And started a blog actually kind of in the WordPress Tumblr like 2.0 era, like early 2010s with my brothers, called Brothers in Craft. It was kind of meant to be like a DIY blog where we talked about like clothing, and it was sort of on like that spectrum of like Americana post, preppy clothing world. And so like boots and denim and, Levi's jackets and like thrifting and like all that stuff was like really hot and like popping at the time. And so we created
the Tumblr age loved that. We were in very different parts of Tumblr. Sure. I definitely was in the nerd geeky Tumblr.
But like, it's funny that we talk about, having corners of the internet, because like that's kind of always existed. Like being on your own little corner of the internet has, is where you kind of found your people, right? Through the internet's like existence. And it's funny, like chatting with people now, and like I'll still have conversations with people who are like, oh my God, like I didn't know you were the one behind like Brothers in Craft, the blog, because we ended up like scaling and building that like blog up to be like quite big, especially on social. Eventually it died out and we shut it down, but it was like we were like part of the early influencer movement when Instagram was still like an infant stage. And like I remember like basically doing like bartering with brands where they'd be like, hey, snap a photo of our shoes and we'll send you a free pair. Like before like budgets were a thing, and like brands weren't sold on influencers, brands weren't even using Instagram. And so that was kind of like my kind of next act in being in clothing. And so built relationships with brands kind of all over the world, and got to help them craft marketing strategies and help them adapt to social and get on Instagram and Facebook and like that kind of stuff. And so that was like early days. And then pivoted into tech and got into e-com, but it was still kind of finding myself interacting with those same brands just on like the tech and, software side. So that was like brand fashion into e-com. And then I find myself now kind of back in like the brand world now.
I think the interesting thing about that is like, you're never like, when you came out to even build Brothers in Craft, it was never like, oh my goodness, that wasn't even a job title. There wasn't really an influencer job title when you did that. It was just like, hey, this is this cool trend I noticed. I'm going to make it. I'm going to play with this. Let's have some fun. Let's just see what happens. It wasn't like, here's my
that's the reason that it worked. Like to be fair, like, and that's the reason stuff still works now. Is like the most organic projects, the most organic like manifestations of like content, however you're creating it, whether it's through TikTok or Twitch or YouTube or Substack or whatever. Like that's the stuff that people like the most, is when you are just like sharing what you know. And then you find other people who care about the things that you're sharing, and then you form a community around it. And then that thing grows and it builds. And like, if you ever like going into like force the issue on like something like, I'm going to make it this,
feels weird.
It's like, it's shortchanging, I think, what it could be. And I've like learned that I think with Sprezza a lot too, is being like, I'm not like the authority or expert on this stuff. I want to create a space where like I'm able to amplify other people's perspectives and voices and just share what I know, because that's when you open it up for other people to like want to contribute. And I think that's when a community grows and is built.
Well, and I think like one of the things that, as kind of you and I have always kind of chatted about this creator space, as this kind of creator space grows or people want to get into this space, it feels forced, it feels hard. And there was a really great, I was actually interviewing with someone the other day and they mentioned, I actually don't like to hire subject matter experts. And I was like, okay, what do you mean by that? Because like we always think about the person who's like 1,000 followers or 1,000,000 followers or whatever. And we're like, they're the expert. And he's like, I don't, because he's like, they already know too much and they can't teach well. Because to them, it's just like some game that they're playing, not just an actual passion. And it's like, they're passionate about the game, not passionate about what they're doing, which I think is something that really shines through in what you're doing. But you have scaled Sprezza, you've done collaborations, you now have a paid option, you've done meetups. Like, what does it mean to kind of scale this for you in your eyes?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out, just because, you know, part of like scaling anything is tied to like money, right? And like needing to have money and resources to like build it the way that you think it needs to be built. And the other, you know, part of scaling something is tied to like having an audience or a community to build it for, right? I think one thing that's been interesting that I've noticed in like this creator world and over the last couple of years, and you know, even in like D2C and consumer spaces, is that like you have brands who were taking money from like venture capitalists last 10 years that were building brands and then finding people to buy products from those brands. And I think what we're seeing now is like the opposite of that, which is that like you're seeing people build stuff centered around communities, and then the products are what follow from that, right? So you're finding your people first around a shared interest or a topic or whatever it is, and then you're building things or productizing things as an extension of the community that already exists. And I kind of like that model a lot, and it's really the shift that I've been trying to make mentally with Sprezza, is that like I want to build stuff that people like around my content, rather than like build stuff and then go try to find a bunch of people who like it too. And I think like maybe it's possible to do both, but my mindset is kind of more focused on like creating content that resonates with people and then productizing it after the fact. So like an example of, you know, what we'll get into in a bit is that like a lot of people ask me like, where should I shop when I'm in New York City? Or what are brands that you like that are in this price range at this category? And those are like questions that consistently come up. And so I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to like create one singular source where like someone can go and find these products or find these brands or find, you know, these locations. And I think that hopefully that's like solving a problem, right? Because that's really what I want to do, is just like solve the problem that doesn't have a solution to it. And so like, that's part of what I'm thinking. In terms of like tangibles and stuff though, I think like ultimately I'd love to see Sprezza grow from just being like the newsletter medium that it is into like other layers of content, say like video and podcasting. And I think like the events and in-person stuff is a huge part of that too. Like I've done a London meetup now with some of my readers in the UK. And then I've done, you know, you were part of the Brooklyn one that we just did a few months back. And that's the kind of stuff I love, putting people in circles and like just letting them connect and go after it. And like people have gone on to like work on projects together. Some people have like genuinely become friends, you know, because of like the meetups that I've put together, and that stuff just makes me happy. So like that's a part of it too. And then I think that there's certainly like a product side to it, whether it's like building some kind of a retail marketplace where people can find the brands that I talk about and I write about and shop from them, sort of like Shopify style, or creating a space where you know, people can have like a one-stop shop, like styling service. Like there's all kinds of different ideas that can be productized from the community. But I think the key point is that it's like, I want to build it because people like it, like people are asking for it, not because I'm just building it and then putting it out into the void to see like who likes it.
Well, and I think like you're forgetting the one meetup where we FaceTimed you in, because a few of the readers early on, we had a meetup and it was like, I think 4 or 5 of us. And we were like, we're all going to meet up in New York, and then FaceTime Clayton in. And so I think it's been really cool to see
that was awesome.
Different people kind of come together over this like really small idea, and like the community aspect of it is really started to grow. But I think it's, again, because you were so authentic. Like you're currently using Geneva right now as kind of a platform for people to message, but I think you were also even starting to see a lot of the people reach out via Twitter. Like, how has it been converting and kickstarting like this Geneva platform, or even like your most recent survey that you put out?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the Geneva thing has been like really cool to see. I mean, one thing that I've seen specifically around Geneva is like, obviously the user adoption isn't what it is with like, I guess it kind of all depends on like generational users, right? So like, there's like the Slack generation, which, you know, came up in like the mid 20 teens, and now, which is like, that's all we know. If you worked at any startup the last like 5 to 7 years, is like Slack. Like that is the tool of choice, even taking over like email in some cases. And so there's users that are so accustomed to using Slack that it's like the thought of peeling off to Geneva is like a huge feat. And it's been hard to get those readers to post consistently or like at all from the Geneva stuff. And then there's like the kind of next phase, which is like the Discord phase, right? Where like everybody got in like hardcore on Discord, like gamers and sneakerheads and crypto folks and like all that stuff. And then that is also hard to get those user bases. And so now I think there's like this next phase where with Geneva specifically, what I like about it is that it's like an actual tool built for creators, and not just creators, like communities. It's built for like what communities actually need. And I think that's why I use it, and like I'm really bullish on it personally, even though I don't think the user adoption is like quite there yet. But I think like now we're starting to see like the next phase is going to be like probably the Geneva phase, where like people are really hyped and pumped to like find their corner of the internet for these people. And we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I don't know I can't remember the second part of your question, but that's about that.
And I think like a lot of it has been like I don't remember the second part of my question either, for being really honest. But I think the other thing is it's really interesting to see like these smaller, more niche spaces take off. Like, I don't think anybody really wants to be in it feels like you're yelling into a void sometimes. Like
For sure.
It's like, okay, great. And I don't really want to yell into a void. It's like the equivalent of like, you really want to be in the middle of Times Square. I think anybody who's ever visited to New York, you're like, or lived here, you're like, cringe. I don't even want to go in that general direction. But I think that many times like those hyper inflated Discords or Slack channels or whatever, they've kind of become like standing in the middle of Times Square, which is not cool. You don't know anybody. You're probably getting approached by 1,000 people to buy some shit.
Yeah. For me too, I think like the difference between like a Discord and even Geneva is like just the anonymity around Discord. Like there's no personality to it. Everyone's got a weird gamer name with numbers and random symbols, and like no one has a profile picture. Versus then you get on Geneva and it's like you see someone's name. Like you can add the location that you're based in. You can see what they're working on. Like you can see a photo of them too. And I think like, yeah, the key parts for me are about just like the connection of like knowing my people, knowing where they live, like who they are, like what they're interested in, what channels they contribute to, and removing that anonymity is, I think for me, like that's what I like about it.
And I think that's what's kind of super helpful. And I think especially with the way that you've built Sprezza is like, it is based around you. It is based around your kind of your opinion and kind of your creatorship, and people are coming to you for experts, which is kind of, let's segue in. Let's see how well we can do the segue. Segueing into our next thing is your curated database that you've been starting to build. Is it a good segue if you call it that it's a good segue or not? I don't know. Don't make the rules. But
we'll go with
kind of this designer database of collaboration. Like you've started throughout this newsletter, and I know even myself, like I've been like, oh crap, need to get for my husband Joe. What's the best thing? What is the whatever? Or even like I've used your Geneva group a lot for that. Like, what does that mean? Like, who has this great thing that we love or know, or so on and so forth. And you're starting to create this kind of database of ideas and curations. So I'd like to kind of hear about that and where that's going.
Yeah, touched on it like a few minutes ago, but like the idea is just creating a space where people can discover brands in one place. So it probably is more of a necessity or like circumstantial like tool that people would use. Like, hey, I'm traveling to the UK, or I'm traveling to Paris, or I'm going on this trip. I want to know where the best this is. Or hey, this holiday is coming up and I want to buy something for my significant other. Like who should I shop from? Like what are great brands or products? So there's like kind of the circumstantial and needs-based side of it that pops up that some people will just have when they have a need to fill. And then there's like the people who are probably just more naturally curious and want to see and know like different things. So like some of the tools that like I've loved coming across over the years, like coffee finding apps. Like I love finding new coffee shops that exist in different cities and like where they are in the neighborhoods, because you can often kind of find out information about like what the neighborhood is like based on what the coffee shop is, right? And I think, you know, maybe it's the same approach with these shops, is that like you can find, you know, cool stores when you want to, and it's for more of the curious, you know, folks. And then I think like the idea is that I want to sort of be like a visual database in the same way that like what, you know, Thing Testing has done maybe with, you know, consumer products and having reviews and, you know, showing a database of like, you can drill down into different stuff. You can filter certain things, you know, by category, by product price point, by like anything you want. And that's something that I think would be like cool to launch. And I kind of want to probably launch it as like a product hunt, you know, thing too, just because I'm like, oh, this is like a tool that I built, no code, that can exist on the internet. And, you know, it can be sort of crowdsourced in terms of like what to share, but it can also be like upkept by the community itself. And I think that's something I'm kind of interested in building right now.
Right on. And I think that's like one of the things that's like, I like the crowdsource element of that, because I think we all have our own recommendations. And I think like earlier on, you mentioned how subjective style is and how, you know, interesting and how curated style can be. Like we all have our own things. And maybe, I mean, even online shopping, right? Like there's Etsy stores have kind of taken off, or I think of even the people who are, I have a friend who's been getting really into Poshmark shopping, and she like has a list that she keeps on an Instagram highlight of the best Poshmark stores for her style, which is like an interesting thing I never thought of kind of without any of all this stuff. Which is kind of a interesting kind of expansion of how it's all going. But
it's like, it is really set up for, you know, curation more than anything. And I think like for me, I think curation as a service is going to be like the next wave of like how people make money, live, do stuff on the internet, right? We're kind of now entering this like post, you know, like ads based phase of the internet, where it was like all about like amplification through an algorithm and, you know, following tons of people. And it's like, that's obviously still part of the internet, but like one thing that I'm really bullish on is like being able to curate stuff in a niche way for people that like solves a specific problem. And I think that's what's going to help. So like the idea is that you can find whatever you want on the internet across every like category. Like you can find your people, you can find your product, you can find your thing. And there's like that, maybe, you know, hopefully thousands and thousands of like different projects like what I'm building with Sprezza, but it's like across categories, and it's across genres, and the idea is you can find what you're looking for. But yeah, that's the hope.
Yeah. So for the last of the hour, I mean, let's, if you don't mind, we can build out this database a little bit and have some fun. And
let's do it. It's
like
very,
this is the fun buildy part, which is kind of, let's get you going on this. And also hopefully if you haven't, so kind of the tools we're going to be using today is Notion. So if you haven't used it, we're just going to be using Notion.so for this, which is kind of a database note-taking tool. The other one that we'll be using is Super, and it's super.so, which is like a no-code, low-code site builder. The pro and the con to using Notion and Super is like, some people don't really want it to look like a Notion page, a page of notes. Like I think that Notion look has become so ubiquitous that it's like, good job, you didn't do anything on top of that. But it's been super fun. And so
I mean, just about Notion specifically, like I pretty much put everything in Notion. Like I that's where I live my life. That's where I keep tabs on like projects and stuff. And so personal, professional, anything, it like goes into Notion. And then, you know, where Super becomes, I think, interesting is having access to like dress up and tweak and like build templates out of like the Notion docs that you're using, right? Because Notion is really just a doc storage business, right? It's sort of like a glorified like Google Docs, right? It's where you can store information and create templates of things and all that kind of stuff. And then, you know, what you have with Super is the ability to like use CSS and styling to connect, a page from Notion into Super. And then you can create your own domain for it. You can buy templates that the community has already made, for your own web pages. But the idea is that it's sort of a no-code version of being able to leverage, what Notion has from like an information standpoint, and then just visually make it more interesting and cool, design-wise, just using CSS specifically.
Yeah, and I mean, we use this for our own wedding website because I project manage my entire wedding in Notion because for the type A freak that I am. But there's a lot that you can do. So these are all just like pages that I'm scrolling through right now that are all just Notion pages that have been, you add a little, like these are custom created. You can add a little CSS on the front end to make it pretty. But here's kind of the raw database we're working with. So Clayton's already started to like load these up with a bunch of new independent brands. So we can start to see all of these. And these are just looks like just kind of pages of different curated things.
Yeah. So if you go back to the first or like main page, the ones we can focus on are like London, Paris, and New York should be in there, but it might be at the bottom. So as you can see, like what I've done with the page is, you've got the name of it. You've got, all this is like basic styling that you can do. You can rearrange content blocks. You can change text to headers and all that stuff. And then I created details for each one that it's like a toggle drop down. And then it's got, specific notes about, that store. And so that's kind of how it's structured in Notion. But obviously like the styling is pretty basic in terms of like what you can do. And so the idea is you can go into Super and do more than that.
So I'm going to just quickly take this and we can see what it looks like currently this is what it looks like within Notion. And so we can make this a little prettier today. What is your dream? Like in your dream world, this is what I need the sound effects button, but like in your dream world, what is this? What would you want this to look like or be?
I think like to reference, what the think testing folks have done, I want it to feel a little bit more like visually focused. So, the idea is that you can create a database that, databases are really boring, right? Like it's just rows and columns of shit. But then like on the front end, like what the consumer can see is, access to different stuff. And, theirs is obviously a fully custom website, but getting it kind of like in that direction of like visually speaking, and having like tabs and things you can drill down into. That's what I would love to do. And if you go back into that main page and then click on menswear brand directory, you will see this is like, there's obviously more to it, but like this is all the brands that I've curated. Oh my goodness.
Wow.
These are all like brands like
279.
Yeah.
Look at that. It's 279 brands. That's a lot of work that you've done.
And then if you look on like, you've got the names of the people that I'm connected to each brand. You've got, if they're on Shopify or not, you've got, about information. You can put the location, you can put the type of products it is, you can put the category, you can put the price range that it is, when it was founded, the website, like literally everything. So that's wild. Like what I'd love to do with all that random information is like be able to create almost like each brand is its own like card, right? So like you can click into a card that's like a quick view pop-up or something, and then see like information about, who they are and what they do and all that kind of stuff. And you can even change different like views. So I think if you check out the table view, that should have something. No, actually go back to default. I want to see if I can remember how to do this.
We can create a new card view if that's what we want.
Let's see if I can find it. So yeah, like, I guess based on that, like, where do you think is the best place to start?
I think let's start by jamming in the card view. So I think one thing you can do is once you get to this, Notion like works really well in this stupid gallery view. I say stupid gallery view, but it's kind of just like what they like to do. So we can create like a gallery view.
Yes.
We call it by.
Perfect.
Do we want to call it by store name for this one? Name.
Yeah, that works.
Cool. Card preview, if you had any page contents, like if you had an image or like a page cover, you could put it there.
There should be a few that have photos so far.
I don't know if they're page cover or content. I'm just gonna put them content for now. Sure, fit image, center peak. That's like a new one that I haven't played around with super yet, but Notion has it so like you can peek it on the side or peek it like when it in the center of your screen. Or that's been a new one that they do. But we'll call this by sorted by store. Great.
Dope.
Fun. And then properties, we probably want to show category or location.
Yep. Location, category. I'm going to drop in information about this stuff. So like,
website maybe?
I would say, I'm just going to drop this information in first. So like, we can put location.
Mm-hmm.
We can put category.
Mm-hmm.
We can put, we can put website and price point.
Price point. All right. And so we can show there, and so some of them are going to start popping up as we hear. I feel the Clayton energy on the other end. But what we can do is start making this a little prettier. So what we can do, so right now, if we open this up within the super side of things, click on this nice little Sprezza shopping guide. We can click in this menwear brand directory. And all we're going to do is going to refresh, and I can sort by store. And so it's going to take a quick second to load just because he's got 279 things in there. But once we do, we can see how it's kind of just blank right now for the moment.
Yep.
And so we want to make that prettier and obviously load a little bit faster. So it is a downside. Notion is notoriously has a bad reputation for being a little bit slower. I do believe that there's some folks on the super forum that have figured out some hacks to do. And then once you start loading the pages more and more again, like your browser kind of remembers that, which is like not what you want to rely on, but like does help a little bit. But again, like it is all database structured, so it is kind of nice to have that in here.
So I've just added a field too for image, like a header image. So let's see if this pops up. I'm just using like the second to the top page, Earl of East.
So image. Cool.
Yep,
so we can,
the image just dropped in there.
Under properties, it'll have image, and we can click image. We'll turn it on.
Oh, I guess that doesn't make it the header one though. Which one should I drop that into?
You just have to change on the layout. Go to layout, and it'll be like fit image card preview, and just change it to image. And then you can choose to have it stretch out like that or put it in like that. So that's what we'll do to make it all added in there. And so I see some other like a few local favorites. Only New York had a really great weekend sale this weekend. Sample sale.
Yes.
So
okay.
That one I do know because we do own the Department of Sanitation hat in our household from them.
Yep.
But once you get into here,
so that popped up.
Yep.
So we good.
So it'll pop up, and then we can click on here's the super preview. All I'm going to do is click Command refresh, and we're going to start to see it's set to default to this first view, but we'll show you kind of how to like preview there.
Yes.
And so it'll load up, but we're going to just kind of play around with this view for start. So there we can start to see the store, and it's got this nice little font. Diving into like the super back end, what we'll do is jump in on the CSS side. So super relies like basically it treats your Notion page as a CMS, your content management system is the official term that they like to use in the web geeky folks. And if you're not a developer, that's totally okay. I actually learned to code doing random projects like this. And now I'm a self-taught chaos dev is what I like to define myself as. If you just say chaos dev, then you win, right? That means you win on the number of Jira tickets.
So on this one, like, should I Like, should I just populate a few more of these brands? Like,
yeah, if you don't mind populating
pages?
a few more brands, we can play from there. So I'm going to just click into it from this, and you'll see that nice little slow loading time. And it's giving me a little error. This is what we like about the startup life. Startups built on startups. But what we're going to play with, let's go back. Come on, Super, don't fail me now.
There's like some slightly confusing things about the Super page. Yeah.
It is like, I do think it's like a 1 or 2 person built startup. So I give them a lot of credit because like it's like, there's another version of it called Potions that is pretty good. But if you ever want to start like having like site icons, like that little icon in the corner when you load your site, different properties, so you can even choose to like limit the properties on your database pages. So when you see right now, it'll let me click in to this Earl of East store. I can choose to disable that. So it'll not have those details at the beginning. So
and then like, if I want to, like, let's say I want to drop like photos into this, like when you click into the card, I can just basically do that by clicking into it from the Notion side, right?
Yeah. So if we're going to go to Earl of East, let's see if I can click in back here.
Yep.
I'm going to open up a new split tab. So I've been using the Arc browser. It's like the browser company one that everybody got excited about. So open up Notion. I'm going to open up that menswear brand directory. I'm going back to the main page. Let's see if you're under London and it has Earl of East. Doesn't have it here, but maybe I can search for Universal. So Universal Works.
Yep. So those are separate pages actually. Like the directory is like the full broad directory. I should have probably explained this. And the retail guides are like places to shop in certain cities, but there's kind of separate because the directory is built on like it's built on like a table with like columns and rows. And then the retail guides are just built on like pages, if that makes sense. So they're not connected, but I guess like now that I'm thinking about it, is there a way to connect them or should we connect them?
I almost think like there is a way you can connect them. Yes and yes. If that helps. But we can do it in like a cool way. It's like, because I really do like this like layout here.
Yeah.
Notion like recently updated their like breadcrumb menu stuff. So you can even put a link to like Universal Works and then drop I'm just going to enter and breadcrumb it out. So I can just copy this link. And I'm going to drop it in here and you can link to the page. So it'll be like Universal Works there. Or another thing is just turn this into a link up here. So you can Command K and it'll just link that there.
Sick.
So, and then I'm just going to take, for the purpose of this, take this and upload it here. Let's see, download, yada, yada. And we can just drop these in. Choose file. No one judge my downloads folder because I always have chaos in my downloads folder. It's like that in my desktop. But I'm mature enough and I make my desktop a folder that says desktop shit, and I wish I was kidding. Because then it's legit. If you just put all your stuff in your desktop and then in a desktop folder, then you're good, right?
Of course.
Yeah, no one knows. So we can just take this little detail, drop it here, create that. And it has everything already linked. And then you can use back, I'm gonna undo that, Command Z.
Yep.
You can create what they call like the synced blocks, I think is the official term of the Notion verse. And I actually have a way, if you click on the top, turn into synced block. And so that'll sync it all there. It's a little janky when you have multiple blocks, which is like what Notion calls the little that's, I don't know, blurby thing.
A little bit tricky working with it like that, but yeah.
You couldn't do that. Also, I noticed I hit undo too many times. And I'm just going to cut this link out.
So I guess one thing I'm curious about too is like when you're looking at it from the super view, if I wanted to just like add basic styling to a specific card, like let's go to, I guess we can just go to the retail guides that I made because that's the most populated one. So if you go to, let me, retail guide and then type in retail in London, that's the one that's the most populated I've created.
Woo.
So doing it on the super side. Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Starting to minimize that out now. Bye.
So yeah, if we go into super and we look at that, like the imagery is obviously some is landscape, some is vertical. Like, what's the best way to like stylize that so that it looks like more interesting and consistent?
Yeah, so I'm just pulling this up here so you can see the super and the Notion side by side. Pulling up
at the top, I think. Does it have it at the top?
Not currently. Oh, I think it's because my my browser doesn't have. Perfect. It's not wide enough.
Yeah. So retail in London. Yeah.
So this is currently what it looks like.
Like all I've added really is just like text like font editing. Like that's really the only thing that's been. And I think like imagery wise, you can see like I've expanded the imagery horizontally to where like it looks a bit more yeah, like aligned, I guess.
Yeah, like editorially. So one, you can change, like if you want to, not navbar, under code, it'll have these like little head body CSS, which will kind of apply to like all over the global site. This is a little like janky on this. So they have this like custom code thing. It is not like, it's pretty good on like a lot of this stuff. So you can start to see like how it works. You can do it by page or kind of global overall. So if we're going to go back in here, this would change it to everything on your entire site.
Got it.
But if you wanted to do it just on the page, we'd go find this page, scroll down. You might have to find like a retail guide. So we'd pull up add new page, retail in London. We can call this retail in London. But it'd be like your URL / retail in London, create page, be a valid Notion page, subpage. So we might need to go.
Should be it should be valid.
Should be valid Notion page. Well, let's figure out what's going on there.
Notion. Yeah, I can. Here, I'll share it with you, Aaron.
Let's see. I've got the copy of the link. Add new page. Let's see. Create page. Oh. Now I got in London. I'm not sure what error we're getting there. Clayton Chambers.notion.site. Retail in London. Yeah, I'm gotten that same link.
Is it already in there?
Maybe.
Click on pages and then go to
London right there. Duh. London. That's why it's like not doing it. It's like, hey, dummy, you already created this page. Just kidding. Ignore. Step 1, check to make sure that you actually don't have a page already created. Because
they're like dropped down into each main page because this is technically, I guess, a sub page.
But you can go in and just edit the code just for this page. So if we want to add in kind of anything from like the custom code section, what we can do is start styling itself. So they have Super actually has a really great job of like making like little code snippets. And we can do anything from creating different blocks to creating different ideas. You can choose to hide this like Notion header at the top. If you're like, I absolutely hate this, change your, whatever. If you want to do a call out blocks into a button, if you want to change your text color or background color, we could, if we want to get weird, we can start to even create things like.
What if we did borders around each card? So they're like, instead of it being like the horizontal line that separates, it's like a Notion thing. Like each specific store from like the name of the store down to where it says details is like a border that's like separating it. Is that possible?
I think we'd have to move them into like we can move them into like what Notion calls like their call out box first and then style it like that. So if we want to do that, let's copy this. I'm just going to test. Oops. And then call out. I just moved it into a call out box. This should be here shortly. Internet, come on. And so right now you just see kind of this clunky call out box.
Yep.
There's another fun stuff that you can do. So under call outs, you can choose to hide this little icon.
Yep.
And just like by uploading a transparent PNG. So Notion has like these nice little icons they've now done, but you can just now add a transparent PNG. So I've got one. Let me just. And all it is like literally a transparent file and it goes away.
Interesting.
And so that's one thing. I see that as it takes a second to load. The other thing that you can start to do is kind of creating like the different design stuff. So under like the theme, we've got there. We can also turn these into a link. So if you wanted to go to the store, so if this like you want to take it to the store side of things. So I'm just kind of referencing under Super, they have these really great like code snippets. And so you can start to just kind of create it here. So call out blocks with one line of text that is a link. So if we want to do a specific call out with a link, you can start to even change like how they move forward with these. So the other one they have is kind of these fun little, like, if you wanted to completely go from scratch. And I need to stop at one, so we can keep playing around with this. But what you can
is there also one like, is there also like a way to change the toggle that says details into like a button separately?
Ooh, I like that. We can make a button. So they have a Notion now part. I didn't even know a lot of these exist. What is the tweet header button?
There's like a call to action, but it doesn't like take you away from the page. It basically just drops down the information. It down.
We can style it. So if we want to do a toggle. This is what happens. Startups built on other startups. The site is slow to load. Their code on how to do a toggle. Blah, blah, blah. I'm looking for a toggle. I don't want text colors. I don't want any of this. I want toggle. Toggle. So toggle icon, it tells you this like little Notion toggle template before. So this will tell you what it does. I want to see on their templates how other folks have treated it. So I kind of, what I've done in the past is just like creeped on their like documentation pages.
With the other template, yeah.
And then just seeing how they treat the code. And so usually what happens is it's documentation. And I'll give you everything here. So like the code documentation, see the official Super documentation here. And so it has like, here's your variables if you want to start adding these in. So if you really want to start going in and adding these right within the browser, it'll give you that. Also, you have people, if you really want to do this and self-host this, you can have a great time and go completely bonkers on this sort of stuff. But I really like, there's usually one, I'm trying to think the one that I have stolen a lot of code from and modified it because their documentation is really good. It's a free one that I've done a lot of. It's or no. That's this one. Their documentation is great. I want their documentation. So it does have like these style sheets that'll have all the CSS in it, which is kind of like fine, but you can just take this if you don't want to necessarily duplicate it out. And this will tell you this is all the CSS that's basically there. So all that stuff she's doing is linking it there. So I just pull things out. Like here's a fade animation in. If you want to have that nice fade animation in. If If you want to change, here's all the typography to change all of that. Here's kind of how they treat the gallery images. So if you wanted to build out, say on this page, where is that page? Ugh. On the Menwear brands directory where we have this gallery page. Once we refresh it, because it's an old loading version, the store, if we wanted to change how this looked, we could just upload that one.
Love it.
Love it. But I know you've got to jump here. But yeah, that would be kind of the basics there, and we can play around with it. And I'll send over a YouTube.
Dope.
But
very cool. Thanks for letting me be part of this. This was a lot of fun.
And having fun with all this. So we can play with all of the fun stuff.
Very cool. Well, excited to be part of the first part of this first cohort of Aaron for Tech crew. Excited to see like where it goes and everything, and obviously a big fan of what you're doing with this, side of the internet and being able to like create more accessible information for people to build shit. So yeah.
Well, back at you, and now it's time to go kind of put it all in tutorial format. So fun. True. The cycle never stops. But,
thanks, Aaron.
Well, thanks for coming.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good one.
Yep.